My name is Helen Monroe, and I am 77 years old. I was not hoping for anything extravagant, no big celebration and no red carpet. All I had been looking forward to was dinner at my son's home. A modest meal, a place at the table, and a few hours with the family I had supported for an entire lifetime. I had just finished straightening the navy blue dress I saved for important occasions. It was not stylish or expensive, only clean and appropriate. The kind of dress my daughter-in-law, Vanessa, would not openly criticize. I checked the clock. It was slightly after 6 in the evening. Dinner was meant to start at 7. Then my phone vibrated. I reached for my glasses, assuming it was a reminder from Lucas or perhaps a last-minute question about dessert. Instead, I read the message. "You were not invited. My wife does not want you there." That was all. 8 words delivered by text. Not a phone call, not a discussion, just a message. First, I assumed there had been a mistake. Maybe it was meant for someone else. I even wondered if Lucas's phone had been compromised. But the number was his. And the tone was unmistakably his. I lowered myself into a chair, the phone still in my hand. My heart did not shatter all at once. It slowly came undone. Memories rushed in. Lucas as a small boy holding tightly to my hand on his first day of school. Lucas at 12 years old crying when his dog died. Lucas proudly introducing Vanessa to me, excitement written all over his face. And now Lucas, a grown man, was telling me I was not welcome. I stared at the wall, completely still, not crying, not reacting, just quiet. That was the moment something inside me changed. After all the years and all the giving, I finally considered that it might be time to stop showing up for people who clearly did not want me there. The house felt unnaturally silent. I stood up and walked to my secretary desk, an old piece of furniture my mother had left me. I opened the drawer where I kept my financial records. Every folder was marked. Every receipt was organized. I took out the thickest folder. It was labeled with my son's name. Inside was a lifetime of support. There was a check for $20,000 to help him start a business, one that failed in less than a year. There were tuition receipts from when Vanessa returned to school to earn her real estate license, transfers for roof repairs, money for a down payment on their new home, the kitchen renovation Vanessa insisted they needed. Each document told a story, not of kindness but of expectation. My money had been their safety net. My name had quietly supported every part of that house. 6 months earlier, Lucas had called to tell me they had found the perfect home. A lovely townhouse overlooking the river in a new exclusive development. He said it would be a place for the whole family. He told me I would have my own corner there. That corner, it seemed, did not include a seat at the dinner table. I looked at the brochure still lying on my kitchen table. I had contributed $120,000 toward the down payment. It was not a loan and not an investment. It was a gift, my way of saying I was there and that I cared. Now it felt as though I had paid my way out of their lives. I leaned back and quietly asked myself the question I had avoided for years. Was this love, or had it always been a transaction? For the first time, I did not rush to defend them. I did not justify their behavior. I simply sat with the truth that I had spent a lifetime giving, and they had grown used to it. I did not sleep that night. The message replayed in my mind again and again. Not invited. My wife does not want you there. By morning, I knew what needed to be done. I made a strong cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and looked at the stack of papers I had taken from the drawer. Then I picked up the phone and called the bank. The woman who answered greeted me and asked how she could help. I clearly stated my name and told her I needed to suspend all automatic payments connected to my accounts immediately. She paused and asked if I truly meant every payment. I told her I did, without exception. I also told her I needed to revoke the power of attorney I had given to my son. I could hear her typing as she explained that this was a major change and that my signature would be required, but she could start the suspension right away. I told her to begin immediately. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It felt steady and strong. I had supported my son, his wife, their lifestyle, their goals, and their responsibilities for more than 2 decades. That morning, I remembered what my late husband Arthur used to say. He always reminded me to love deeply, but never allow myself to be trampled. When the woman confirmed that all 174 automatic payments had been stopped, I thanked her, ended the call, and took a deep breath. I had not realized how heavy the burden had been. Years of small sacrifices, quiet disregard, and holidays spent alone while still paying their bills had added up. That morning I did more than stop payments. I took back space in my own life. When my phone buzzed again and Lucas's name appeared, I did not answer. Instead, I typed a short message and stared at it for a long moment. It was time for him to cover his own expenses. Then I turned off the phone and stepped into a new chapter. By the time Lucas arrived at my door, the kettle was already heating on the stove. He did not knock gently. He rang the bell sharply, the sound of someone who was not there for conversation but for control. I opened the door, and he entered without waiting. He asked what was happening, concern in his eyes barely hiding his irritation. He listed the problems quickly. The mortgage payment had failed. Morris's car payment did not go through. The bank had called about suspended authorizations. He asked if I had canceled everything. I confirmed that I had. I told him it was all of it, every one of the 174 transactions. He collapsed into a chair, stunned. He demanded to know why. I stayed calm and explained that he had removed me from his home, one I had helped pay for, sent a message blaming his wife, and made no effort to stand up for me. He tried to explain, saying it was a mistake and that Vanessa had been upset. I asked whether the mistake was sending the message or assuming there would be no consequences. He looked away. I poured 2 cups of tea and placed one in front of him, though he never reached for it. He finally spoke about obligations, loans, tuition, and the house, reminding me that I had always been the one who helped. I agreed but explained that over time, that help stopped being appreciated and became something they no longer even noticed. Lucas opened his mouth to answer, but I lifted my hand to stop him. I asked him to name one thing he had ever done for me, something he did because he wanted to, not because he felt obligated. I asked for one thing that did not involve him needing something from me. My voice was calm, steady. He said nothing. He sat there in silence. And in that silence I had my answer. 2 days later, Ethan came to my door. He looked unkempt, his shirt wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes, carrying the nervous energy of someone who had never truly faced consequences. I let him in without much conversation. He dropped onto the couch and rubbed his hands together before telling me he needed help. He explained that his credit card had been frozen, that he could not pay his rent, that his car payment was overdue, and that he was in trouble. I sat across from him, calm and composed, and asked how much he owed. He hesitated before saying it was about $7,000. I asked what he had spent it on. He shrugged and avoided my eyes, mentioning a new phone, a trip with friends, and a few parties. I nodded slowly and reminded him that he had been working for 2 years at the insurance company. I asked why he had not learned to manage his money. He looked like a child being corrected, not a 23-year-old man. He admitted that he had always assumed he could ask his parents or me for help. I told him that was exactly the problem. They had all grown used to believing I would always be there to fix things. I told him plainly that I was not his backup plan and that I was not his bank. He leaned forward, desperation creeping into his voice, and asked me to help him just this once, promising he would pay me back. I refused firmly. Then I told him I would offer something else instead. He looked confused, so I explained that my lawyer, Mr. Collins, was looking for a part-time assistant to answer phones. I told him it would not solve everything, but it was honest work. He blinked and asked if I would really do that for him. I told him that I loved him, but that I was finished enabling him. I explained that my love was no longer measured in money. He sat quietly, unsure what to say. For the first time I did not give in. And for the first time, he heard the word no spoken not out of anger, but out of love. Real love does not always feel comfortable. Sometimes it sounds very much like a boundary. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Clara arrived with a bag of groceries and a gentle knock on the door. She did not come asking for money. She did not come to plead on anyone's behalf. She came simply to check on me. She told me she had seen her father earlier, that he looked lost, that her mother was furious, and that Ethan was sulking. She said the house felt like chaos. I did not respond right away. We unpacked the groceries together. She chopped vegetables while I boiled pasta. After a while, she asked quietly whether I was okay. I looked at her carefully, really looked at her. Clara had always been different, quieter and more thoughtful. She never asked for much. She called on my birthday. She visited without a reason. She always hugged me just a little longer. I told her that I was okay, and for the first time in a very long time I believed it. She smiled and said she thought I was doing the right thing. When I questioned that, she nodded and explained that she had seen how the others used me, especially her mother, who always dressed the best, drove the best, and somehow always had me paying the bills. It startled me to hear that from someone so young, but she was no longer a child. She was a woman and she saw clearly. She told me I had taken care of everyone for so long, and that it was time someone took care of me. We ate dinner together, just the two of us. There was no tension and no manipulation. Only a simple meal and honest conversation. Before she left, she hugged me tightly and told me she would always be there for me. Not for my money but for me. I kissed her cheek and told her that was all I had ever wanted. In a house that had long echoed with demands and expectations, Clara's presence was the one thing that felt real. It reminded me what family was supposed to feel like. Safe, sincere, and free. The next day, Lucas called again and said that we needed to talk as a family. His voice sounded tight and rehearsed, and I could hear Vanessa in the background. I told him we would meet the next day at 2 in the afternoon at my house, and that there were to be no surprises. But there were. At exactly 2 o'clock, Lucas arrived first. He looked exhausted, his shirt wrinkled and his eyes puffy. He told me he wanted to speak with me before everyone else arrived. When I asked who else he meant, he hesitated and admitted that Vanessa had invited a few people, including her parents and her sister, because they were concerned. I stepped to the window and froze. 3 cars had just pulled into my driveway. Vanessa stepped out first, fully dressed and confident, followed by her parents, her siblings, and even a couple of their friends. I turned back to Lucas and asked if he had really brought an audience. He began to explain, but I raised my hand. When the doorbell rang, I opened the door slowly. Vanessa stood there with her group behind her and greeted me loudly, saying they were there to discuss the situation as a family. I told her quietly that this was my home, not a courtroom and not a boardroom, and that I had not invited any of them. She blinked, clearly caught off guard. I told her that Lucas, Ethan, and Clara could come inside, and that the rest could wait outside or leave. Her smile faltered. She turned to her family and asked them to wait in their cars, saying it would not take long. Reluctantly, they stepped back. Inside, I faced my son, my daughter-in-law, and my 2 grandchildren. I calmly asked who wanted to explain what the situation was really about. Vanessa immediately launched into a speech about how my financial decisions affected everyone, including her parents' retirement plans, Lucas's brother's situation, and even Ethan's future. I listened with my arms crossed and said nothing. When she finally paused, I asked her when I had become responsible for all of that. No one answered because they all knew the truth. They had not come to repair a relationship. They had come to protect their lifestyle. The silence in the room was heavy. After that, Lucas spoke quietly and admitted that they had come to rely on my help, that I had always been there, and that they never thought I would stop. I nodded and told him that was exactly the problem. They had not thought at all. They had only taken. I turned to Ethan and asked how many times he had visited me simply because he wanted to, not because he needed money. He shifted uncomfortably. Then I faced Vanessa and asked her to name one single thing she had ever done for me without expectation. She opened her mouth and then closed it. I explained that what hurt was not only the money, but the erasing, the way I disappeared from their hearts the moment I stopped paying. Vanessa's expression hardened, and she accused me of manipulation and guilt. I told her calmly that I was finally telling the truth. She stood up abruptly and warned that I would regret this when I was alone and no one was there for me. I did not flinch. I told her softly that family is not just a word we use when we want something, but a choice we make every day through our actions, not our invoices. Lucas looked up, his eyes glossy. He asked what I wanted them to do, whether I expected an apology or for them to beg. I told him no. I said I wanted him to grow up, to stop confusing love with dependence, and then I told them to leave. The words were steady, but they landed with force. Ethan stood and left without arguing. Vanessa muttered something under her breath as she stormed out. Lucas hesitated, unsure. I told him I would still be there if he ever wanted to talk, truly talk, not about money but about us. He nodded slowly and followed the others out the door. Only Clara stayed behind. She hugged me and told me she was proud of me. I did not answer her. I simply held her close, because for the first time in a very long while, I had nothing to prove and nothing left to give except the truth. 6 months passed, and for the first time in decades, I was no one's emergency contact, no one's financial plan, and no one's silent sponsor. I was simply Helen. I spent quiet mornings on the porch, sipping coffee and reading books I had put aside for years. I took walks through the park where Arthur and I used to stroll together. I even signed up for an art class at the community center, something I had always wanted but never allowed myself to prioritize. Clara visited often. She never asked for anything. She came to talk, to laugh, and to share her life with me. She became my only connection to the family, and that was enough. As for Lucas and Vanessa, their calls slowly faded. After a few more attempts, some apologetic and some demanding, they stopped entirely. Clara later told me they sold the house and moved into a smaller apartment. Vanessa took on extra work. Lucas finally learned how to manage a budget. And Ethan, to my surprise, accepted the job with Mr. Collins. I ran into him once at the grocery store. He looked tired but different, steadier, more grounded. We exchanged a quiet greeting. That was enough. As for me, I went to Italy. It had always been Arthur's dream, one we postponed for too long. Clara insisted I go. She told me to do it for myself just once. So I did. Now I sit on a terrace in Tuscany, watching the sun set over rolling vineyards. My oldest friend, Margaret, laughs beside me as she writes in her travel journal. She tells me I look lighter. I tell her I am because I finally set down the weight of other people's expectations. In doing that, I found the one thing I had always wanted: peace. Not the absence of noise, but the presence of self. The quiet strength of someone who no longer needs to be needed to feel whole. That evening, as twilight painted the Tuscan sky in shades of gold and violet, my phone vibrated. Lucas's name appeared on the screen. 6 months earlier, I would have answered before the second ring, already preparing to fix whatever problem waited on the other end. This time I only looked at the screen and let it go dark. I did not need another promise. I did not need to be pulled back into a cycle I had finally stepped out of. Instead, I lifted my wine glass toward the horizon and thought of the version of myself who had always come last, who stayed quiet at tables where she was not welcome, who smiled through lonely birthdays, who paid bills with trembling hands and called it love. She was gone. In her place stood a woman who had learned that freedom does not come from holding on to people, but from releasing the need for permission. I owe no one an explanation for choosing peace. I owe no one my savings, my time, or my seat at a table where I was never truly welcome. What I owe at this stage of my life is honesty with myself. Later that night, Clara sent me a photo of her new apartment and a simple message, telling me she could not wait for me to visit, and that she had made a room just for me, always. I smiled because sometimes the legacy we leave behind is not the money we gave or the house we helped build. It is the truth we finally spoke and the boundary we were brave enough to draw. If this story reached you, share it, because someone out there needs to hear it. It is never too late to take your power back.